for SK to pick it up here. Trying to walk through the smoke, but it's just not going to happen. SK Gaming, second major championship in a row. They are your winners.
Despite Fnatic's best efforts, it goes the distance, it goes all three maps, and we have our champions, the best team in the world, Ninjas in Pajamas!
Red touching the bomb, are they going to peek? Holding it now, and there is it. It's just out of Flamey, it's not going to happen. Astralis have won the face at London main. There's no time! He just has to watch that clock tick down! This is it! Na'Vi have taken the major!
Hello everyone, welcome back to Time Travel LAN. Content everyone claims they want, yet they don't watch. It's going to be a trip down.
Okay. All right then. Okay.
Starting aggressive. We've had a break between sessions.
Yeah.
We'll do a little recap soon. Obviously, I'm Richard Lewis. I've been around for a while. I am an aging, decrepit boomer. Slightly less boomer is obviously the esports historian, Duncan Thorne Shields. And also, it sort of goes in descending order. Then it's a little more, I think, and then Chad. Is that right?
Yeah, I like to think Chad and I are on the same level of boomerism.
Okay. Right. Well, the good news is that for boomers, obviously, will remember all of history. And so the premise of Time Travel LAN, if you haven't seen previous episodes, is that we took the 16 best teams that we sort of agreed upon over the course of CSGO history, and then we pit them against each other in a virtual tournament, and we discussed the merits of who we think would win and why.
And it's to the death as well.
As Richard said, the key detail, it's virtual. Because I've already had contact. Like I had an email today from a Mr. N. Nihom. He says that Astralis can't play the land. They've got to skip it. And Device definitely can't travel through time. He can't even travel time zones.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot more like that, was. I was like, yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
It's been a while.
Hitcham Shaheen actually did a tweet saying, if Streak Nip get their full real lineup, it will be fire emoji, so it'll all be good.
Fair though, if there was one person in the whole scene that could actually make this land really take place in some sort of like metaverse of Doctor Strange, probably the A_FA9 from NIP or whatever his name was. He got the major in fucking in Stockholm, so he could do anything.
Decadent, obscure reference, just an episode of Petty Grievances again, isn't it? the ultimate podcast. But anyway, so just to recap, I've actually got it written down on paper in front of me, because again, being a boomer.
How many did we actually do so far, by the way?
So we had these are the games that we had by the end of episode 3. We cut it up into 3 episodes the last session. We had Astralis 2018-2019 Astralis versus Gambit. We had Astralis win that.
Sure.
We had Streak NIP versus 2015 NIP, the one with Arlu, and we had Streak win that. Big win for the boomers there. And then down at the other side of the bracket, we had 2015 Fnatic versus 2017 Cloud9, the one that won the major. We had Fnatic win that overall. And then we had 2014 VP versus 2015-2016 Na'Vi. And we decided that the Plow would win that one. So that's what we've had so far. And next up, guys, and this is, I'm going to be leveraging you hard here, Jason, because finally, this is going to be a matchup where you might actually have some insight. So looking forward to hearing it. It's 2019.
Beyond his extensive counterstrike knowledge, I hadn't followed all the games. Was that back,
Obviously. That's the joke, obviously.
Okay.
No, look, Josep Guardiola just got wrecked last night, so it's the night of the ball.
I saw some bold fraud tweets going out, and I was like, I haven't been doing much,
what have I done?
I was like, what did I do this time?
Yeah, no, it's not you. It's Guardiola. Anyway, 2019 Team Liquid is why, because I know some of the players on that lineup, obviously you've worked with quite closely, and they're going to be taking on 2013 Very Games, the Very Games lineup that went on to become Titan. For the Zoomers, that lineup was Existence, NBK, Smiths, Scream, and Shoxy. And they had old school Regnum as kind of a backup manager kind of guy there.
Doing the servers.
Yes. So, well, let's start with Duncan talking about the Very Games Titan team, because I know you ranked them quite high when you did your seedings for this. Obviously a lot. There was a Reddit thread, funnily enough, called "Correcting Richard Lewis's Time Travel LAN," right? Because even though it's an opinion-based show, there is a
Don't get your fucking opinion wrong, Richard.
Yeah, exactly. There isn't. I'll just steal people's opinions like Chad.
That's
used
my
to.
shtick. Come on now.
All the scandals to ever be involved in, that has to be one of the most low-grade shit ones ever as well. Like, you stole my opinion from Reddit, who were you, just a random guy.
Yeah, like he's fucking Voldemort,
it's so wacky,
draining people of their opinions. But anyway, so I know you had these guys ranked pretty high, but there was some people who were going, I don't know if I would put that team on that list. For me, I don't know if they would make the top 16. So is that someone's recency bias? Or is it a fact that this team is just overrated because of some of the names that were on the roster?
The problem this team has basically is it's in the same camp as 2018 FaZe Clan. Like, the lineup is mega. It's some of the best players. It's a really good set of players at the time. They at one point are number one, but they win everything but the major. And the problem is, if you don't win the major on a list like this, you're already in a tough spot. Like, spoiler, if we do the other side of it, the whole reason why we just had Cloud9 on this list is just from winning the major. That's all they did. But the problem is that is in people's mind the biggest accomplishment. So understandably, you're not going to get like top 10 on this list. Well, I mean, Team Liquid's maybe the rare examples we're about to talk about. If you don't win a major, it's going to be hard to get top placings. Like, you're going to have to basically be like Team Liquid was unbelievable. The problem is, fans like the reality is this is end of 2013, so people didn't watch CSGO back then. Even people who know these names are remembering late, like they're remembering 2015 fucking existence and Shoxy when he was in G2 and bloody 2016 years. You have to realize in this team, like at the time, this was basically the best French lineup, minus they didn't have Kenny S. Obviously at the time, Kenny S and Shoxy used to always swap position and be the main player played on. Minus Kenny S, this is the best lineup you can make out of French counterstrike, which at the time is right up there in the world. So like Existence is the best leader. You have, because obviously Happy hasn't come around yet. Then you have like Shox is the best player, maybe even in the world. He's like contender with Get Right and the NIP guys. You have Smith's actually, if people don't know, this is when he was still a competent player. Like he was like a support player that could frag, who definitely did work with he's been mega friends with Existence and Shoxy for years and years. It's clearly part of the structure. NBK was an amazing like lurker / secondary caller. And by the way, low-key, he even won MVPs around this period of time. People don't know of like whole tournaments. And then you have Scream. You notice I've almost put it as all Screams, like, and also Scream's a fucking massive fragger, and a guy who actually, interestingly, this is one of the claims to fame of this team, he used to actually have a lot of his good games against NIP. So if people don't know, 2013 was the year that began when they had Kenny S and they had Scream in the lineup in very games, and they famously lost every single game to the NIP guys on LAN. Then they brought Shoxy in, and they only lost something like one more LAN after that, and then they had this period with this lineup now where they beat NIP, the team that, remember, at one point in that year had been the undefeated NIP. They beat them 3 best-of-3 series in a row at tournaments back to back to back. So I'm assuming we already did it, right? We have that NIP team, like top 3-4 team of all time. This team dominated that squad when they actually got the real lineup rolling. So there's one feather in your cap. Secondly, a lot of people don't know this, right? When they were winning these tournaments, NIP didn't win any more tournaments. It took NIP something like 7 or 8 months until they became a tournament team that won championships. So even when this team lost, it actually was upsets. Like it lost to iBuyPower at ESEA LAN, for example. Apparently the one where like Shoxy was just playing like fucking techno music in his ears or something, and while they were just playing the final, because again, they are French. That's the key fatal flaw, isn't it? No matter how good they are, they look at their passports and they give up in the final. What can you do? You know.
Yeah, I think the way that Duncan's putting it there when he's talking about the star potential, the player potential in very games with the Shox and Scream, all that kind of stuff. But then when you do think about Existence being one of the better, if not the best in-game leader at the time, and coming from Source, like they were the full package when you think about it that way. It's just so strange that when you measure them up player for player against that NIP, knowing obviously what we know now, like people forgetting how strong Forrest and Gerard were at the time, it actually seems like the better firepower probably should have been with Very Games, right? So it's curious that more freestyle of NIP was able to get on top of this team back then, right? They obviously played a little bit more structured with Existence, always having something a little bit nerdy, because in Source, this is where they had the shine, right? Coming through all these players. I remember watching from Australia, watching them play, like, and when they would do like an execute on Yard on Nuke or something, and this is in the Source days, it was just some of the best utility usage I had ever seen. So having Existence bring that across into CSGO was always going to be part and parcel of that, right? But this roster right here, if I remember rightly, they won MSI Beat It, which was like the first international event that we went to in CSGO as an Australian team, right? We qualified in some online qualifier, and then we went to MSI Beta in it was Beijing.
Right?
Yeah, and they were there, and they ended up winning that event. And I think this was with Fnatic before they maybe they just made
I think
the
it was
change.
the first event with Pronax. It just brought in, like,
they just
years
made the
earlier or
change.
something.
Yeah.
Because the major was going to lead in after that, right? And that's where NIP didn't go to this event, but Fnatic was there, SK was there. There was a bunch
NIP
more
didn't qualify
local
because
teams.
Very Games beat them online.
There we go. Okay, so they ended up getting to that event, and then they won that event over Fnatic, and nobody really thought a lot of Fnatic at that time, really.
Yes.
And then you go into the major, and Fnatic were the team that ended up winning that. So Very Games beating the team that had just formed, which ended up winning the major a couple weeks later, right? It wasn't that long after. I think they went straight to Sweden. So, I think this Very Games roster, it's hard to quantify looking back, because for me, the little bit of that shine still rubbed on off from Source, and where I looked at it and went, they're playing some of the best Source I think I've ever seen. It's hard in that to get like a true look down the lens at the team. But at the time, they're no doubt like the second best team of that year, right? NIP didn't even win the major towards the end of the year either. So there's probably some debate to be had there. But in terms of French rosters, this was everything you wanted, and I agree with Duncan. Like, people think of Smiths as a meme, right? But he was a competent.
They don't remember.
He was a very competent AWPer. Like, he would get
The
job
joke is,
done.
this is how he got to be a meme later. He earned so much respect from teammates in this era. They always thought he'd sort of get his level back or whatever. So that's why people don't realize that it's essentially the analogy's like Fallen now. Like, people will know in his last few teams, maybe he got some of those gigs because of rep, not his level. But he sort of earned the rep, though. You know, it's like there's a reason why people then think you're better when you're not as good. Makes sense.
Jace, anything to add to that?
Sorry. I mean, I would just say, I don't know. I think that Very Games team, that French lineup was actually one of the first cool, like, I think I even fell in love with that roster a little bit more than even the NIP guys back then. I always really enjoyed watching NBK play. I think he had a very similar outlook to like Smiths in the sense that people kind of forget how good he used to be during this time. NBK was like one of the only people not in NIP that could go toe to toe with Forrest and Get Right. Like, it'd be wild. Like, you'd hit the scoreboard and he'd be up at like 36 kills and Get Right would be at like 38. And you're like, oh, okay, this is a crazy battle. But then if you also, I mean, just looking at some of the skills of those guys, like Smiths too, like, you know, eventually that the CZ would come in and there was the fast switch to the CZ before they nerfed that. He was like a fucking monster with that. He kind of like really is one of the first people that revolutionized that in my mind. He's like the guy I have playing that one out. And then Scream, this is back when like the AD tapping back and forth could go, and like the clips from Scream from this era are absolutely mental. So like some of the clips out of this team are crazy, and I think it'd be very easy, I think, to forget how talented these players were. So yeah.
You know what, we're talking about obviously Smiths, you know, being competent back then, but one of the things is you compare it, and like I'm not throwing any shade at our boy Fifi here, right? But in terms of like superstar AWPers back then, that wasn't name of the game. These were the two of the best teams at the time, right? I think it was when JW started doing his flashy bullshit is when like and his isn't even like AWPing is how we consider the best AWPers today doing it. He was using it up close and personal, being more disruptive, right? But it's not like NIP or Very Games had crazy good AWPers that were just owning, right? It was the riflers who were the monsters. Like, you think about the names we're saying here, Get Right, obviously Forrest, you've got Shox, you've got MBK on the other side of things. Even Freiburg back then, like, it was just like riflers and mauling, and I think that attests to how the game was probably played back then, which was obviously much quicker than it is right now, and there's a bit more of like a pack mob mentality in the way you do
that was the big
shit.
meme, Chad, if you remember at the time, because it was on HLTV. The famous headline was NIP can't be a successful team without a world-class AWPer. I think Lurpis might have penned it as like an op-ed in his sustained campaign.
He was trying to take 50 down.
Yeah, he was. But that was the big meme, and like NIP were going, we think we'll be fine without, and obviously they were. So yeah, I felt like you didn't need it as much then.
It's important to note too, like during this time, like a lot of the teams, like especially, well, I mean, NIP was maybe unique because they were bringing in players from Source and 1.6, but Very Games with all Source players. All the teams that were forming around this time were coming in with that philosophy of a previous iteration of Counter-Strike, right? Like, no one had really gotten used to CSGO to the sense that you would really start breaking the mold and testing things. And yeah, neither of these teams obviously had the playmaking AWPer. All their playmakers were the riflers, the Get Rights in the Forest, and obviously NBK's, Screams. I think even at this point, like Kenny S hadn't even really fully realized his potential. I think what was it 2012 when they initially cut him out of the French rosters after like an ESEA global final event or something like that. Like he just hadn't been there quite yet either. So like I think there was a lot of growth for the Oppers in terms of how they play strategically and individual. And like you said, JW is the first one to really blow that mold wide open.
Yeah.
So just as a random piece of context, that I should also mention, like the fact they didn't win the major. So Chad described already the first major, which is actually the first ever CSGO major, DreamHack Winter. That was the one where what happened was Very Games and NIP, the two best teams, played in the semi-final and NIP won. But obviously NIP themselves didn't even win the major because they lost that famous final to Fnatic inexplicably. Now, this is the interesting detail. This is how this team was able to be a hair away from doing enormous things. Because you have to remember, it was a different format back then. It used to be a GSL group, which was all BO1. That was what the major was back then. So as a result, the reason they had to play NIP in the semis is because they lost to BO1 16-14 to Complexity when fucking, it was Swag or Nothing did that like bomb site fake on Inferno, if you remember. So that made them on the same side of the bracket as NIP, so they couldn't make the final. They finished top 4. Then the next major was the one where it was the Virtus Pro one where VP came out and won. Here's what people don't remember about that. VP had that lineup. They were called like Universal Soldiers at the previous major, and they were dog shit. They just went out on the group stage. So what people don't know is, think in your mind, the hype is this is the real best team unofficially in the world, VP from Scrims. They're not even the top seed in your group. The seeds in your group are Very Games, Titan now, and Hellraisers. They're the top seeds. So you get the eventual stomp team that loses one map in the whole tournament as your third team in your fucking GSL group. Like, that's by definition the hardest group. Like you're not. That's a group where, listen, you're still supposed to get out if you're Titan, but it's harder all of a sudden. You've got two teams that can beat you. And if people don't know, they lost to VP. That's fine. VP beat everyone. The other game was a 16-14 or 13 loss to Hellraisers on Inferno. And the story behind it, I'll just very briefly say because it's funny. And this doesn't excuse away, but it shows how it's margins of error that are the difference between having a really nice big major runner. We could make a great point of this team being higher, or a shit performance like coming in second to last at the major. So what happened famously was, because they were such a tactical team, they did a division of labour in the Titan house, and everyone had a job. You had to do homework on one of the opponents in the group and their maps. And it's not a joke. When it got to fucking the game against Hellraisers, that was going to be the decider, they said to Smiths, it was your job to do the homework on Hellraisers. Now, the map they should have played against Hellraisers, off the top of my head, I think was Dust 2, and they would have smashed them on it. Titan was an unbelievable team on Dust 2. But Smiths said something mental like, oh, I didn't really do that, so I guess we just play them on Inferno. And it turned out Inferno was like the best map for Hellraisers, and then they won like 16-30. So that, listen, my point isn't that excuses it and they go top. My point is like, it's a different game back then. That can't even happen at a major now. Like, first of all, you'd never have that weird setup of like, oh, you're studying those that I'm not. Like, there wasn't coaches back then. If people don't know, you didn't have analysts. It was just existence and Smiths doing it all. And then on top of that, the format of these majors back then just means that like it's a lot easier to fuck up a whole major. Put it that way. Like, here's the difference. If we talk later, if you remember, there was that famous phase lineup before they got Olaf and Guardian that fucked up a whole major and went 0-3. They went 0-3 in like a real Swiss system, though. Like, that's way harder than this. This is like you lost one map and it fucked your whole tournament, basically. And you got unlucky with the draw. So my point is just that, like, it's not totally like, it's not like they were just bad at these tournaments. Like, they had a little bit of the zig when they should have zagged, you know?
So here's a question for everyone. Is Existence the best IGL not to have a major?
Oh, you'd probably put Kerrigan up there as well, I have to say.
Yeah,
like you'd have to have Kerrigan in the conversation. I think I would say no. Just I think the thing that hurts Existence the most, because I actually loved his in-game leading, and I loved watching him do it, standing behind him at events. But the longevity, I think, really hurts it in his ability to like stay within CS:GO throughout all the different meta changes. Like Kerrigan's been here for everything. He's gone through all of it. He's gone through all the different strategic and tactical changes. Existence not being able to find a way to be able to stay with the team throughout all that, I think really hurts his bid. And I mean, it sucks too that he could have never gone international the way Kerrigan has. Because obviously, like, once you're kind of out of the French scene, like, there's only one team that we've ever really had from France worth kind of discussing. Like, there's nowhere else to really go. And Kerrigan's been able to move around to mouse sports. He's been able to go with full international rosters. He hasn't been stuck in that Danish scene. Because if for some reason he can only speak Danish, he might be like locked out of teams just by the fact that Glaive is in Astralis at the moment. So I think the longevity really hurts Existence, but that shouldn't preclude us from saying that he was an incredible in-game leader, incredibly smart.
Chad?
I agree with that sentiment. Yeah, no, I think that Jason's point right there about him not being able to stick around, like, yeah, sure, even there were so many players in the French team back there. It's like we had 3 French teams, right? Like, Well, there's obviously the two good ones, and then I'm sure that they could have made a third decent one there if he couldn't have got something going with the meta at the time, right? Obviously, the stuff I'm talking about is very execute heavy and utility based and whatnot, and it was always a bit quicker in pace. I like that point from Jason, right? Obviously, I think Carrigan would fit the bill a little bit better going through all the years. Just and the sheer length of Carrigan's career. So right now, I don't think I put Existence on the same pedestal as Carrigan.
It'd actually be cool, like, because there's usually always been one dominant French team, but they had those couple majors, like Chad said, where there were three French teams. I always forget all, like, there's the LDLC, there was like the Very Games Titan, and there was like one other one started with an E, I think, that I can. Yeah, like it'd be interesting to know like why he was never able to drop down to an LDLC or an Epsilon and bring those teams up. Like, if it was the inability to adapt to a
I might have a little bit of insight on that because obviously, all these, most of the French players were the ones coming from Source. And it was a scene that had such like a plethora of talent historically in Source. The Very Games lineups had dominated since 2008. And the only thing that broke that up was Nameless, which was where KRL basically said to Very Games, fuck you, I'll build my own team. He took RPK across to that lineup, and they were able to mix it up a little bit with them. But in 2012, it had got a bit weird. It had got a bit dicey in the French scene. So 2012 was sort of like the official death of Source. We had Copenhagen Games, which, as Chad can attest to, that was like a big LAN on the circuit for us, It was a big international LAN. People traveled from all over the world to come to it since it started in like 2009, 2010. And this one at 2012, because CSGO had come out, the beta had been, circulated and stuff. We all knew it was over. We were either going to quit or go to CSGO, depending on where you were in your career. And so at that time, the French teams had been divided into kind of just weaker versions of themselves. Very Games was Existence, NBK, RPK, Apex, and MK. And Very Games had a pretty disastrous tournament by their standards. People thought that they could still win it. I think they actually went out something like...
Didn't they go like 9th or something?
It was really like 9th,
bad, right?
9th to 12th or something like
it's pretty
that.
Bad.
Interestingly enough as well, it was really overshadowed with internal team strife. There was like lots of rumors that people weren't getting on. And the forgotten man of the French scene was a player called MK. I remember when I was reporting at Cadred, MK stole a player's laptop. You remember that?
Yeah, I remember this article.
Yeah, it was one of the Portuguese players from.
Wasn't it something mad though? Like here's the maddest thing I'm remembering. He didn't even just like steal it as in like he's got that. He just like stole it, but stayed at the LAN like while he'd stolen it. Or something.
Yeah, he like stole it.
So like denied he did it or something weird.
Yeah,
right?
he stole it, went back to the hotel, put it there, came back. Somebody had seen him take it, and then he was like sort of denied. It was ridiculous. I remember he contacted.
He was actually doing like it wasn't me.
Yeah. So, but the thing was as well, MK wasn't that well regarded. Like when he joined Very Games, it was quite shocking at the time. People were like, "Don't know about that."
He was like a smoother of his day or something.
No, not even. More like he was just a talent that hadn't really blossomed at all, and people felt it wasn't good enough. But meanwhile, what had happened was because Shocks and Scream were active and were well regarded, and obviously Shocks and Smiths were a duo. They went and joined a relatively new team called Thermal Take Dragons. That was Thermal Take, their official sponsor team, and that had Malek as the IGL, and Uzi was the 5th player over there. And they, I think, finished about the same as where Very Games did at this event. And so you were sort of looking at, Very Games were being reduced to picking up bums like MK, who, the type of motherfucker that'll take a laptop on the way out of a tournament. Brilliant. You're meant to be one of the best teams in the world. And Thermal Take Dragons, like, they were the team that was meant to be carrying the French flag, coming out of this event. It had to be them or Very Games. But funnily enough, both of them got beat by the Americans at this event, Fully Talked, which was the team with Steel, Mo, TCK.
X with the shaky aim, right? Oh
no, yeah, that was no. That was Pex had quit by then.
Okay, he had an afro too going on.
Yeah, he did. He did. He was a good old lad. So that was the context. Basically, the French team the French scene rather had lost a lot of its talent coming out of the back end of Source, and the only way they could be relevant was essentially to set aside some differences of and as you saw, it was Shocksmith, Scream, and MBK and Existence came together from these two teams, Apex and RPK, obviously out in the cold for this kind of, the best iteration of the team. I think there was a big hangover, left over with a lot of grievances. Obviously, Kenny S got lost in the mix as well on this team. RPK and Kenny S had a big falling out. The reason RPK first retired from this lineup was he used to sit next to Kenny S in the lineup and he couldn't cope with it. Kenny S be slamming his desk all the time. RPK said, fuck it, I'm off to be a mechanic. Because he just doesn't like drama, you know what I mean? So yeah, it was a weird time for the French scene, but this for me, this very game's Titan lineup was the distillation of everything that was good. You've got all of the best players in one place. Now, obviously, we'll talk about their virtual opponents here, and I'll start with you, Jason. 2019 Team Liquid is the team that got to number one in the world rankings. Obviously, had just so many ridiculous trophies. They had a streak of wins where they ended up doing the Intel Grand Slam in a record time frame.
64 days, I think it was.
Yeah,
60,
64 days to win a Grand Slam. And their entire year looks good, really. If you go across sort of the expanse of 2019, they win DreamHack Masters in Dallas. They win ESL Pro League Season 9. They won ESL Cologne 2019. They won Blast Los Angeles 2019. IEM Chicago. They're second at the Summit, the fun tournament. Semi-finalists at ESL New York. They won the... What else did they win?
NFL Masters thingamajig at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. So they
wins a win.
I was at that event. We don't count that event. That event was so fucking scuffed. I don't even think I can. As a long-time Liquid fan, I cannot count that event.
Twist said when he looked at the face of the Astralis players, it counted for them, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
What's great is, by the way, I would completely discount that if any other player said that. I don't even really believe it myself, but I'm just saying it for the sake of being ridiculous.
So, Jason, tell me about this team.
Look, obviously just an incredible run. I mean, it's a team we all know. It's a team that had it was pretty much like a NA Dream Team that they put together once they brought Stewie in. But I mean, you have obviously Elish, who's probably going to end up going down as the greatest player to come out of North America, unless Twist ironically has something to say about that. Twist, fantastic mechanical skill. I mean, it's a team that obviously for years the biggest thing that they were missing was mentality and energy and heart to them, and that was exactly why they brought Stewie in. This was the first year that iBioPower event was the first event playing with Stewie, and they got immediate returns on that. I think too, when you look at this run, especially, I think there's actually an important qualification to make with this team is do we want to talk about Team Liquid for the whole year? Because I think it kind of changes the way if you just look at them for 2019 versus their Grand Slam run. Just in my head, I have that almost differentiated because I think outside of the Grand Slam run, you see a bunch of those old issues that they weren't able to overcome still. You see some weaker placements at the majors, those massive events that's supposed to be where they kind of really stake their claim. Top 8, they only made it to the quarterfinals in Berlin, getting knocked out by Astralis. Katowice as well, upset by Ents in the quarterfinals as well, not able to make it past that. And I think if you go past that, even a DreamHack Masters Malmo towards the end of the year, they went out in 9th, 12th, didn't even make playoffs. So, I mean, outside of that, 64-day Grand Slam run, they had a relatively, in my mind at least, pedestrian year where a lot of their victories were mostly just kind of regional American events. But one thing you can say, obviously, during this Grand Slam run is the individual skill on full display. Some of the events that they actually win throughout that Grand Slam event probably shouldn't even have been won. If you think of some of those events, some of the unlikeliest event wins, you think the Nitro clutch against Navi on Dust 2 that comes into a comeback on Dust 2 against Navi to help them win Cologne. And then you think maybe even the Nitro clutch on Overpass earlier on. I think that was in France as well, where he has some monster clutch against Vitality. Some of these victories are absolutely insane. But I think the important thing to note is during this period, all 5 players on an individual level hit their peaks. hit like their god form all at the same time for whatever fucking reason it just occurred. And you could see just the power behind this team once that actually strikes. But because of that victory, in my mind, you can also see kind of some of the pitfalls for this team of where they weren't able to keep that going throughout the entirety of the year. So I think it was actually kind of a rough year for them, despite the fact that they had a historic Grand Slam run.
Yeah, I'll add as well, because it was remiss of me. I didn't read the lineup. Obviously, it's Nitro as the IGL, Elige, Twist, Nath, and Stewie 2K with Adrian as coach. Chad, obviously, you were, active in the scene on broadcast by this point. So you were at most of the events that they won. Did you observe anything that was kind of like special about this team at that time that might explain how they were all able to like level up and synergize so well to achieve this record-breaking Grand Slam?
I think it needs to go back a little bit into 2018, right, when Taco and Zeus were there, because I think that they had maybe a better year in 2018 than they did in 2019, obviously without the accolade of the Grand Slam, right? Because I look at this, the 2018 version, it was the same pieces. They just plugged Stewie in to give them a bit more flexibility, but I don't even know if they meant to plug Stewie in. I remember the Pro League finals at the end of 2018 and walking back to the hotel after the event was over. I think we hung around a little bit. And this was after Liquid lost in the grand final to Astralis. I think that's what happened in the 2018 events. Yeah, and that was the story of their year, right? Continuing to lose to Astralis. And there was a conference room in this hotel that we had in Udensa, which the players and the talent were all staying at, but it was like kind of curtained off, but they were like curtains in your grandma's house that are like partially see-through. You know the ones I'm talking about. And as we're walking back there's lots of road work, so you can't just go straight into the hotel. You have to walk around the whole building. And you're walking around the whole building, and they're in there immediately after being lost, having lost, all of them having a chat. And it's like Zeus and Taco are next to each other at the end of the table. And I'm pretty sure that's the moment they told the Liquid boys they're leaving to go do the Brazilian project again. And then this is obviously where Stewie and Adren come in the next year. But I think like the basis for that team was done in 2018, right? Like all the hard work that Zeus had done with that squad, because it was the same formula that they approached the game. Nitro was doing the more like supportive AWPer role, right? I fucking hate throwing that around, but that's what he was doing. And then they would, when Stewie came in, it gave them more flexibility because Stewie could do some and Naf could do some. So it didn't just rely on Nitro to have his moments. But I also think about that 2019 run, and I look at some of the tournaments they won to get the Grand Slam, and Astralis wasn't there, for example, in Sydney, right? We all know that they didn't do that travel. They didn't travel to Dallas either to play in Dallas, and that was two of the events that this Liquid had won. And all I'm doing right now is kind of detracting from it, but at least in 2018, they were always just falling short at Astralis. In these events, Astralis wasn't even there. And that right there was like the biggest thing for this team. They never made it over that hump. And I think the change with Stewie and Adren, when they still couldn't really make it over that hump, they just had that success from where they were in 2018, which was the second best team in the world consistently. But then Astralis didn't go to a bunch of these events. And I think in Cologne, that's where Zywood did the dirty work for him, right? It took Astralis out in the semi-final. And then Liquid got to pick up the grand final against Vitality as opposed to playing Astralis, which we thought was going to happen again, right? And that would have been a massive way for them to get the Grand Slam. I think it took a little bit of shine off it.
The only time they had to like kind of face their demons, so to speak, was they played Astralis in the quarterfinals in Marseille at the Pro League finals. That's the only time they beat them during this run.
And obviously the Iber Powers one was before this run began, so that's why.
Yeah, that was at the start of the year.
I will say this. Listen, I'll do Chad a favour here, because I actually respect him. I'll take his point and I'll try and understand his perspective on it. So, I agree with you from this perspective, Chad. Psychologically, obviously, it was a big deal to, in the server, play against the names Device and Glaive and beat them and see on the screen victory, 16 rounds for you. Like, that was clearly a big deal for the players here. Even the one when they did have it Pro League was like a bit like touch and go on the third map, and maybe they weren't going to do it, but see, we had all those entry frags on Vertigo that pulled it out, right? I do agree. It's certainly that matters. The problem is this, though. That's more like the story of Liquid, and like I agree, maybe they didn't fully get over that hump. Like for my money, basically the problem they had was I think Starlight of Berlin was it. I think if they beat Astralis in that match, that would have been the one. It would be for the major. You're probably going to win the. I think that's like the moment, just like the FaZe Clan Boston Major one. That's like the fucking hinge on your entire like. Do you go supernova or do you go down? The problem is this though. When you say it like you were saying it in terms of like for example, they won a team like Sydney where there wasn't Astralis who one of the better teams, right? The problem is you can't do that for Cologne. I agree on the head-to-head, but like the logic can't be, well, they didn't beat Astralis. Why? Well, Astralis wasn't good enough to beat Vitality. All right, how did Vitality do? Smashed them. Like, with that scenario, they're not the best, are they? Like, I agree, though, on the pure, like, this is your demon, you have to overcome. That part of the narrative works, but, like, I think people oversell the fact Astralis wasn't there. Like, Astralis voluntarily took themselves off the board. I can't do anything about that. True. Like, it's like, that's like when people do the same thing. Mike Tyson can't be the greatest. Who did he fight? Everyone that was available. There you go. That's it.
Yeah, if they chose not to.
He just didn't happen to live when Muhammad Ali was alive. You know what I mean? Like that was his problem.
That's when we had the full Blastralis. Yes. That's when they got that nickname, right?
That's what led into that whole thing. Unfortunately.
Yeah. So by the way, can we just say how well it aged? What we were saying at the time. Sure. That all those tournaments they skipped out on, all that Blastralis bullshit was going to harm their legacy long term. And you think about where they're at now and what we could be saying instead. Yeah, I think that take aged pretty well. Sorry, Jason, what were you going to say?
I think they were having a pretty rough year as well. Even the events they did go to by Astralis standards, at the very least, if I remember correctly. Like this was not a good year for Astralis up until I think Berlin. When they won that, they kind of took off and closed out the year strong. But the first like 7 or 8 months was real shit.
Because they were only playing exhibition matches, so you know.
I don't know. This Team Liquid lineup, I think is fun. I think it's really hard to classify because I mean, when I even joined Liquid as a coach, I had a player even tell me when I was speaking to them at one point, just like the Grand Slam's cool and all, and like it's great that we won it and we deserve it, but like we didn't win the Grand Slam because we became like some crazy team because we unlocked some like we like tactically we weren't the best, like strategically we weren't the best. We didn't unlock some like team cohesion that we'd never had before. It was literally just everyone individually was insane during the stretch. And that's like even some of the players themselves are just like, we were just so good at this point for whatever reason. Everyone was hitting their shots, everyone was clutching, everyone was just returning. That helps mask all the other issues that have been going on with Team Liquid over the years leading into that. Like you got to forget about those when everyone's playing individually incredible. So just to put that into context, this is one of those events, this team, this Grand Slam run, just incredible individual heroics.
Is though, there's another area where like I find that such a weird step. I know what the guy means by that. He means like it's not like we solved counterstrike and like we had to be number one. Essentially, we just blew everyone out the server because it's a game where shooting people wins the game. The problem I have with that statement is like, what does he think all the other teams are doing that with the greatest? Like, mate, they're the odd ones. The Astralises, maybe SK or something. Like, there are teams that they just had the best players. They just fragged everyone's head off. Like, if FaZe had won that Boston Major, did they revolutionize counterstrike? No, they just put Nico next to Guardian, next to fucking Rain, and went shoot everyone in the head, and they did. Like, that is also just a valid way to play Counter-Strike, you know. At the end of the day, I'd even say for my money, by the way, that's why I actually love Team Liquid, despite not winning the major, getting a good spot on this list. Because Team Liquid is the ultimate NA team. This is how NA always tried to play CS Counter-Strike, is they wanted to stack skilled players. Even their style, dude, they even bloody, in CSGO, they were the Force-Spiked Eagle team. That is classic NA Counter-Strike. NA is not that you save and you do like a crazy like Glock strat and you try and use like a smoke. It's like everyone buys a Deagle and you shoot them all in the head, and that's how we turn this game around. Otherwise, we keep bleeding money. Then you look at the fragging. They did make a super team. Like every player on this team at one other point in history was the star player of either Cloud9 or Team Liquid. It's mental. Like these guys were, and not only that, it worked. This is a rare example of a super team that worked. I looked up the numbers now. I put in roughly the period when they were like, on this run of all the Grand Slams to like just after the major ends. Here's, if you put it in HLTV.org, here's what that lineup did. Right, so the top 3 fraggers, the big ones, which is obviously Elige, Naf, and Twists. Right, Elige has a 1.22 rating. It's all on LAN. Wait a second, I'll just make sure it's on LAN. Elige has a 1.22 rating. Naf has a 1.2 rating. Twists has a 1.17 rating. Like, you are aware, you just need 2 of those. You've already got a world-class team. They've got 3 of them. Then here's the 2 role players. Stewie, who is the pure entry, has a 1.07. And Nitro, the fucking IGL and occasional Opera, is a 1.07. And all of them are like a positive, like the worst ones are plus 40 for that period. Like, You'll never see a team like that in Counter-Strike ever again. Like, until maybe that Na'Vi team last year, which I would put the only other team I think is in the category. This might be like the most skilled man-for-man lineup to ever play CS. And I think that what's cool is about both the lineups I'm talking about. They made it work. Like, these aren't just the hypothetical ones where, you put all the great players, but like, does this guy play? They made it fucking work somehow. So you can certainly shade into all the Astralis thing, and they didn't have the hardest era of anyone. They didn't win the major. There's plenty of knocks against them. But I actually think when you look at what they did do, though, it's epic. And the other thing I'll throw in is this. There's two angles that people miss. One, do not ever attempt to downplay winning 22 best of X series in a row. Only one team in history ever won more, and they're called NIP at the beginning of the game. The beginning of the game. So every fan out there who goes, Astralis, pick any Astralis you want. They never came close. They never came close to 22 in a row. And by the way, 22 includes tournaments featuring Astralis. Then here's the other detail people don't know. The only reason it's 22-0, boys, is because they lost that Summit final to fucking Vitality. If you go beyond that, mate, you can extend it. I haven't looked up the exact number, but it's something mental, like 35 out of 36 series on LAN in a row. You lose 1 out of 36. Again,
it's actually say
what you like about Astralis, mate. At the end of the day, they didn't like chop their own hands off. Like that is an unbelievable run of form to have. Because like we're saying, you can always shade out like, well, did the best team go? Listen, even if the best team didn't go, every other person in the world trying to be really good at CSGO couldn't stop these guys. Enough said.
One of the funniest things about this team during that run is I remember they used to mention like they as players they're not huge fans of Mirage, and it's never been like a fun map for them. And at one point, like they were asked in an interview, like what's going on with your Mirage? Like why are you so good? And they didn't like realize the question. They had something like mental like a 90-something win rate on it.
They won something like 15 games in a row on it, and they were never even picking it. Moses, people were picking it against them.
They didn't like it. Didn't even realize how good they were playing on it. They were just like, oh, we've actually beat everyone on this map. Like they went down the list and were like, we beat everyone in the scene on Mirage. Like okay, well I guess we'll start picking it then. Like they didn't even realize they were just banging people out.
And there's how you know also you have the God Aimer team. You don't even like Mirage, but you cannot lose on it. To anyone on LAN. Like you're just the fucking God Aimers, mate. Like that's why the angle for this team for me is just like it's like the eye test. Like they were like a Mike Tyson. They had one of the best like knockout punches of any team I've ever seen.
Yeah, here's a question for you then. It might be better for Jason, but anybody can just jump in on this one. Why did the Stewie 2K relationship work at the start when he came into this lineup, obviously joining from MIBR? Why did it click and why did it go south? Because I always feel the big schism in this team historically beyond this 2019 run was when they came back from the player break and things didn't work. Everyone says it was the player break that essentially killed this team. That was when things started to get contentious. Nitro obviously left, and the rest is kind of history. So I feel
this way, it wasn't a good sign. When I did
Yeah.
that Twist interview, I told him the story because I assumed he knew this of like when I was like talking to like Stewie and fucking Naff, and they were telling me, "Oh, don't pick us to win that quarterfinal against the Sharks. We're not going to win it." And when I tell Twist this story, he's like, "What the hell? They thought that? Like, dude, what the fuck? You were in their team. What are you saying that? Like, you're not actually finding this out for years later, but apparently he is." So
I think the
just
first
showed you
mistake.
those different camps.
I think the first mistake is ever assuming that the cracks that were forming at that point in Team Liquid is ever just like caused by one single thing. Like that's like it's not just like to say like Stewie like at some point during this player break like swapped and that's like the main point of contention. There's like they're one of those teams. It's like it's not like if you hit a fucking window with a rock and you see the fucking spider glass go out. And I think that's kind of the main thing is like there's tons of different cracks I think forming at various points. But I think part of it I think is going to be like someone like Stewie's personality, who is he's a dominant personality. Like if you put him in like a social setting, he's like he's got a lot of charisma, so people are naturally kind of like he's fun to talk to, he's fun to hang out with, he's engaging in conversation, and he has a very loud voice when it comes to not like volume loud, but like obviously a good sway within the team when it comes to his ideas on Counter-Strike and his idea and perspective on certain situations. And I think eventually, one thing that we're seeing with him can struggle in the immediate present at the moment is actually becoming a leader of a team, is becoming that leadership figure. So I think he's someone I think it can be very difficult to handle and contain if there's not like an appropriate and proper leadership structure within the team. And like as it just went on, and we would see Nitro eventually leave the team, and Adren leave the team as well. I think that kind of inability to kind of contain it and channel that into something a little bit more positive, which again has been an issue amongst a lot of players on the team, is being able to channel that kind of your personality into something positive and not make it a destructive force in the team. And eventually, I think it just happened to be that it was just way too destructive to handle.
So, Chad, any final points about this Team Liquid lineup and its capacity to win this series before we get to the voting?
Does Chad actually think they're overrated? By the way, I was getting like a vibe like you.
Yeah, I got that vibe too. Actually, yeah.
No, I just Jason.
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say.
Yep.
Well, we've never done that before. You might defend me here, so you go, and then I'll see.
I can say I have like a little, I know like this thing I said, I think also had like a tinge of like overestimating them to a certain degree, or like I was underestimating them. I think the contrast between the different parts of the year really kind of mess with me. Like outside of like some of the finishes at Blast events, like there really isn't like a whole lot of positive outside of that Grand Slam run, as incredible as it was. I will say I have a little bit of like I guess we'll call it a bias, just because I coached the team after this for a while, and I've seen some of the players and how they work, and I think that kind of really maybe some leftover bitterness. Perhaps I don't know. Just colors the way I kind of look at it.
Perfectly entitled to, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't defend me, so
I tried to a little bit. I tried to give you.
No, I don't. The context that I was trying to give, I guess, was to do with because a lot of the teams we have seed number 1 Astralis, right? And we can measure this team to Astralis because they were in power at the same time, right? So that's kind of how I am like leveling out the two here. And that's why I was kind of giving some praise to the 2018 version with Taco and Zeus for setting up the 2019 version for being able to run at home, because I don't think there's any doubt that Stewie's a firepower upgrade over Taco. I don't think anybody would have that conversation. But I think that what they had done as a team meant that Stewie could slot in and he could just hit the ground running in that type of a role for the team, right? And it's the same with like the bullshit honeymoon stuff we talk about, right? But it's true in a way, because the things that probably were grading about Stewie after 9 months weren't grading about Stewie after 3 months, and they're winning everything. But in terms of like when you compare it to like in terms of how good this team was, they were fucking awesome with firepower, as you pointed out. And I also really like the fact that they didn't need a strong primary AWPer, right? In the sense of like he didn't have to be a Fallen or a Device, who at the time were probably two of the other bigger names we would look towards, right? To get it done. They could be a lot more versatile in their approach to the game, which I think was really entertaining to see. It kind of broke the mold a bit.
I think there's one key piece of information we're kind of forgetting, because we've been putting Liquid into a context like historically with all this kind of stuff. But I think one thing that really enabled them, like Chad, you just said, kind of not have to rely on the AWP a whole lot as well. And you want to talk about some of the individual skill that was in the players, Duncan, when you listed off their ratings. This was the stretch in Counter-Strike where the Krieg and the AUG were at their most powerful. The Krieg had that first bullet accuracy that was unbelievable, and obviously you put that in the hands of an entry fragger, you put that in the hands of someone like Elige. The AUG on defense was absolutely incredible. We saw it carry Ents to a grand final of a major out of fucking nowhere.
They might even have been one of the best teams with the Krieg, because think about it, both Elige and NAF were fucking unreal with that.
And Twist, like I don't even like Twist, maybe not even using the Krieg as much, but I mean, you put that in again, first bullet accuracy. Twist is known for that. He was like the new age Scream at the time. Ironically, got old Scream against like the new Scream, the Canadian Scream. But you put that Krieg in their hands. What a crazy weapon that was to watch on this team. Yeah, it was unreasonable to watch this team melt through people.
So, guys, it's time to decide. Remember as well how the voting works. We cast a vote as to who we think would win after putting our arguments ahead. And then in the result of a tie, we go with the Sam-ometer, who will pick
whoever I didn't pick, apparently, if you're watching.
The anti-Thorin. So look, for me, guys, I'll start us off here. I feel I couldn't in good conscience vote against Team Liquid here. Obviously, I got a lot of love for the Very Games players. They came from my world. I watched them all grow up. I mean, in some cases, like literally, because, you know, NBK used to be a 15-year-old AWPer when he first joined Very Games, and was a bit of a phenom. But, you know, I think relative to what that Team Liquid side could do, not even a Very Games team with Peak Shocks, Peak Scream, I think, could have handled these guys. It for me, the Team Liquid side that won that Grand Slam was untouchable at that time. I know the Astralis talk gets brought up a lot, but I feel for that period, even if it was only 64 days, I just wish that player break had never happened, honestly. I really do. I wish if that...
I think they do too.
Yeah. Yeah, because, you know, I feel they would have been more dominant. It's just American teams, for whatever reason, they're their own worst enemies. And when they go and have these breaks, they don't, you know, kind of prepare, and, you know, they end up hurting themselves. But I think this Team Liquid side is the better of the two teams as presented here, especially with the form.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with that Team Liquid as well. You know, as much as I have the admiration for the Very Games team, I don't see a way. I mean, even if you give like the CZ and AWP like switch over to like Very Games, like the Krieg switch for Liquid is like mental. And then I think you just, I mean, as Duncan said, you rattled off like even if you extrapolated 35 of 36 series, you know, played during a certain stretch of the year is just so mental. And I mean, you could just see it. The best teams and the best players in the world were just open admiration on social media and interviews that like there's just no way to handle this team. And just the talent from top to bottom.
By the way,
is
Chris actually pointed this out to me, but I should reference it because it is funny. At the time, we all memed on him, but he actually was right. If people don't remember, when Team Liquid was beating everyone, Vitality was the number 2 team. And if you remember, there was that famous headline on the HLTV interview, Chad, where Alex said, the only thing that can stop these guys is the player break. And he obviously just meant it as a throwaway comment, but Twist said, like, you are so right on that one. Like, yeah, he did. You actually nailed that one, Alex. That's 100%. Well done. It was indeed only the prayer break.
It's so like to think that that was the demise of a team, right? Like it's just so insane when I feel like I'm not given enough shine to Very Games here. Like, but it's so hard to make a good argument of why they would win, right? Even if I start to think. There's a lot of parts of that. I don't know. I think strategically speaking, I think Very Games like probably would have had them covered. But I don't know. I just think across the board there was no weak link of this Liquid roster, right? That seems to be the key. Like they didn't have anybody that was having to be carried through. So yeah, look, I'm gonna go with Liquid here as well. I think maybe this one out of all of them we've spoken about probably has the most recency bias from me. I reckon. Like the Very Games stuff. It's hard. It's hard to think about how good they were, like because they obviously were a very good team. It just like yeah.
It's hard to relate it. It's hard to like relate it over the years. That's why I'm trying to like think in terms of like the in-game stuff that was going on at the time, like the Krieg being super powerful and like the CZ. Like I'm trying to envision like what in-game advantages would there be like in terms of how the game was played at that time, and I can't even see it. Yeah, I think it's tough too because I think all of us have like a certain level of admiration and like nostalgic love for that Very Games teams and obviously existence and all that shit. So, but yeah, Liquid would bang them out.
The thing I find interesting actually is, if people don't know, we didn't like pre-decide how these like matchups would go. We just seeded it 1 to 16 or whatever. It's a bracket, right? So obviously, as you saw, like with one player 16, it just so happens though that like we even have this really interesting contrast. These are two of the best teams not to win a major. They were two dominant teams in their period of time. They even were beating their old rival. They both have like weaker AWPers. It's mainly a rifle squad with like a trio of like. It's actually there's so many fucking similarities between the squads. The problem with this is like I say, if you stack up the raw titles won, like streaks, I'd even say as well, the thing I think's crazy about that like 22 streak thing is you did it in bloody 2019, Nip did it in 2020, 2012 and 2013. Like you did it when the game's totally established. In fact, you've done it after the greatest team ever's emerged within the game. So again, the problem I have is the very teams game in their era, they were the Team Liquid of their era. They were like, wow, a team came up, all they didn't do was win the major, maybe they're one of the greatest ever, but Team Liquid did it later in a more developed scene and with more tournaments. So to me, I just give them the edge. I think they should win.
Do you know what NIP streak was, Duncan? A series streak? Do you know?
Yes, the 25, I think it was.
Ooh, they were close.
Yes, they were very close.
Yeah, I
Basically, I remember
remember
if they'd have won the major, I think they would have equaled it. I think was the start or something.
Yeah, I always remember that Reddit thread where it was like, didn't Na'Vi have like a streak of like
after
7?
they won the PGL Stockholm or whatever,
Yeah,
like, something like that.
and someone was like, "It's just like the longest streak of." Oh, come on, guys! For
Yes,
fuck's sake.
exactly.
Right, okay, there you go then. So, bye, Very Games. Thanks for all the memories. 2019, Team Liquid are going to claim that one.